I will be your facilitator today. This webinar is recorded and you will get a link approximately in 1 week via an email. First, I would like to recognize and acknowledge that the beautiful and historical U of R Avenue campus, where our professional development and community programs reside, is on Treaty 4 territory, the traditional territories of the Anihiwak, Cree, Anishinaabeg, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis Mischief Nation. It humbles me to learn about the past while working on my own truth and reconciliation journey along with you all. We are so glad you joined us today for this webinar, How to Build a Successful Business Analysis Plan with Tips and Tricks for the Hybrid Workplace. Ryan Gersmer is your presenter. He's an instructor for us, a partner at ESTI Consulting Services, an information and communications technology professional with over 15 years of experience. He has worked in roles such as DBA, lead developer, quality assurance specialist, project manager, and business analyst in sectors such as education, environment, and telecommunications. Ryan will share his knowledge, then the last 15 minutes will be dedicated to your questions. You can submit any you have in the chat throughout the presentation or direct message them to Emma Zerbakken, our tech wizard, who you can see in the chat as well. And they will be answered in the Q&A, or you can save them and ask them to Ryan on your own through unmuting in the last 15 minutes. I just want to let you all know that there will be 2 more free webinars this summer, followed by a whole new lineup in the fall. You can learn about emotionally intelligent leadership in July or everything project management in August. You can find those links to register under the U of R website under programs continuing education. I will also include the links in the chat towards the end of this webinar. Now I'm very happy to hand it over to Ryan so he can get started on helping expand your business analysis know-how. Thank you, Ryan.
Helps if I unmute. Can everyone see my screen now? Perfect. If you're comfortable having video on, please turn it on. It just helps me see if I'm connecting with folks. If you're not comfortable, that's okay, because I didn't ask you to do it beforehand. But we'll get started. So how to successfully build a business analysis plan with tips and tricks in a hybrid workplace. Originally, I wasn't aware that we were going to have an introduction, but I did. So I'm not going to talk about myself very much. I do teach 2 classes at the U of R as part of their business analysis certificate program. That's strategic analysis and requirements analysis and design definition, solution evaluation. So if you take that program, I'll be teaching those 2 classes. So just a quick outline of what we're going to talk about. So effective and in particular, efficient requirements elicitation requires a plan. In this presentation, we'll cover the crucial information required and some techniques and tips that are useful for developing a business analysis plan and efficiently carrying it out. So at the end of this, I'm hoping that you'll understand why your organization culture and capabilities are important, what stakeholder analysis and how a RACI matrix can be useful, determining what meetings are required, prioritizing and ordering meetings, putting it all together, what to include in that plan, how to effectively schedule meetings, and then tips and tricks for meeting and eliciting in a hybrid world. So some ancient words of wisdom here. Every battle is won before it is ever fought. That's from Sun Tzu, The Art of War. It's a 2,000-year-old document. And basically what he's saying here is that you need to be prepared before you get started. And it's good advice in just about everything in life. Certainly when you're doing business analysis. So understanding your capabilities, cultures, understanding your organization's culture and capabilities. So it's important to understand what kind of methodologies that your company or organization is going to do. Is it a waterfall, which is kind of serial in nature, like a relay? Is it agile, which is more parallel, or a hybrid model, which is, I think, more what more and more people are doing, which is a bit of both, a little bit of high level waterfall, and then agile or agile-like. It's also important to know your typical corporate frameworks. Is it ITIL, TOGAF, COBIT, or ETOM? This helps you organize your requirement structure. For example, ETOM, SFAB is a big component of that, which is sales, fulfillment, assurance, and billing. And it helps you organize and structure both your meetings and your requirements, specifically within the business requirements. And then finally, I've got here organizational structure and culture. And basically this allows you to know who to talk to. Enterprise limitation and constraints, these are pretty typical for every organization I've ever worked with. Usually everyone's working with very tight timelines and low resources. And so why is it important to have all this? So it reminds me of a TV show that I used to watch called Survivor. Has anyone ever seen Survivor before? I see some nods there. And so it's supposed to be semi-reality TV, but folks always go on to this show, and one of the things that they have to do, or that they used to have to do anyways, is they have to start a fire. And I kind of think of understanding your capabilities and your organization's capabilities and culture to the show and starting a fire. People would go onto the show and they'd have no idea how to start a fire. Or they maybe have an idea, you know, they've seen rub two sticks together, but they wouldn't try that before they go on. It's really important that before you go into planning that you kind of have an idea of what you want it to do. So maybe you want to start a fire with glasses and use the light. If that's the case, then of course, your company would have to have glasses, right? Maybe you need to do flint and steel. If that's the case, then those have to be part of your capabilities. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that this piece of information or this set of information is important for understanding how to be successful moving forward. So have a plan of attack that meets your organization's culture and capabilities. Don't try and do something or don't expect to succeed in doing something for the first time that's outside your organization's capabilities. And that's what you saw in the Survivor. If they haven't practiced this or weren't aware of what the capabilities were, they didn't do too well in starting fires. Famous words of wisdom. In preparing for battle, I've always found that plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. That was from Dwight D. Eisenhower for World War II. And so what does he mean by that? So this is a decision tree that I've got on the screen here. And you can see, you know, each one of those nodes or dots is a new decision. And as the further you go down that decision tree, the more complex it gets. So what Dwight is saying here is that it's very useful to go through a planning exercise so that you're aware of decisions that you need to make, but you can't go too many steps down because once events start happening, things get too complex to pre-plan. So if this is a decision tree, I would probably only go a couple steps, 2 or 3 steps down the road before I start executing in regards to planning. If I spent all my time to do the planning all the way down to those little green nodes at the bottom, I would spend weeks and weeks planning and not executing. So determining what meetings are required. Functional, non-functional, business requirements are all base level meetings that you're going to want to cover. From a business perspective, I like to do product or service description, what you're delivering, SFAB, sales, fulfillment, assurance, billing, legal, regulatory, UX, user experience, UI, user interface, use cases, user story meetings, reporting, documentation, and training. So what I like to do is I like to do my business requirements. Then I like to do the functional and non-functional components, and then broad review. So those are the type of meetings that you're going to need. Stakeholder analysis and how a RASI matrix can be useful. So one of the first things you need to do when you're starting a business analysis plan or any really plan is figuring out who's doing what, who's responsible for what. So I really like organizational RASI charts. And so I've got one on the right here. You know, I like to put down my resource names, what their job title is. In this case, I'm talking about doing high level requirements or an HLR. So what is the RASI component of that? And then on the right of that, I put down what meetings I think they should be in. So a RASI chart talks about being responsible, being accountable, consulted, or informed. So responsible is the person that's actually doing it. So if you're a business analyst and you're doing requirements, you're responsible for doing those requirements. If you're accountable, you're signing off on them. But typically, this is your management layer or your business primes. If it's a consultant, these are your subject matter experts or SMEs. These are the people that are going to be providing you information. And then if they just need to be informed, these are your FYI. So this may be something you at the end of the day, you share your requirements with. And then I like to organize these by SME area. So that's that HLR section here. This is your SME areas. So what I'm doing here is I'm putting down all my resource names, and maybe I get these from a project manager or the business prime, or however your organization provides that information for you. I put down their job title. And at this point, the RASI chart's telling me, should they be in the meeting? Should I let them know an FYI? Do I consult with them? And you know, are these the folks that are signing off? And then beside that, I say which meetings I want them to be in. So for example, I've got Lewis Hamilton. He's a sales manager, so he's going to be both consulted and accountable. And I'm putting him in the sales and fulfillment meeting. Jacques Villeneuve is our technical analyst for security. He's consulting, and he'll be in my security meetings. Lance Stroll is my reporting analyst, and he'll be in my reporting meeting. The other thing that is important here is, and this is one of the first things I do when I'm doing a plan, is I'm actually looking for resource gaps. So is there an area where I want to talk with somebody, or I think I need to talk to somebody, and they don't exist in my resourcing? If that's the case, then I put my hand up and say, hey, I need some more resources. And you can see that here. In this case, I've got, you know, I don't have anyone from regulatory or legal, and I think I need to talk to someone. I highlight in yellow, and then I go deal with that early on, effectively, immediately within my plan to make sure that I get a resource. So I'm not trying to find a resource later on. So that's the purpose of a RASI chart. It's to confirm who's doing what, looking for resource gaps, and then to start my organization of who's going to what meeting. And this is you know, this is probably the first thing I do when I start a project. And it's not really difficult or time consuming. It's probably 2 or 3 hours of work, but it may be the most important 2 or 3 hours of work that you do within planning. And it's probably less than 2 or 3 hours. It probably takes me an hour, but the first time you do it, it'll probably take a little bit longer. Risk analysis. Risk analysis is important. And you typically see a risk analysis done by project managers. You probably see this done regularly within a status meeting and such, listing all the risks, what the probability of that event occurring, and impacts. And then at the end of the day, you have a risk level. So if it's a low probability and a low impact, low risk of it occurring. If it's a low probability but a high impact, maybe it's a medium risk. If it's a high risk scenario, that would be a situation where it's likely to occur and it's also has a large impact. Now, the reason why this is important in regards to planning is it has to do with organizing those meetings. So if there is an area that's low probability of or some scenario, low probability of occurring and low impact, you can probably delay that meeting a little bit longer. But if you've got a very high probability of an event occurring and a high impact, and that's something you want to deal up early on. Because if you start dealing with that problem later on, you're more likely to delay the project. So how does this exactly, how does it, how does a risk analysis go into priority and ordering meeting? Well, the very first thing you need to do in regards to meetings is understand what you're trying to deliver. So if you got a product, service, or functionality, figure that out first. And once you've got that figured out, then you can start having the business requirements. You can't do business requirements or peripheral requirements around something that you don't understand. So the first step is understanding what that product, service, or functionality that you're going to deliver. Once you have that, then you can broaden that out. So that's the very first thing I do. The next thing I do is I look for high risk or big impacts and deal with those early. So typically items that are high impact or big impacts are things like legal, regulatory, security. Sometimes it might be complex functionality or areas of unknown weakness. Other times it's PETA, which is pain in the rear. That's what PETA stands for. That's the webinar version of it, pain in the rear. So that would be a group or resources that either are a pain to work with, or that you might have a personality conflict, or just require extra care. So I have those ones early. And the reasons why is because it might take me a few iterations, a few meetings to get through it. If I leave that to the end, if I procrastinate on that, again, it's going to probably result in me being late. And I don't want to do that. So what to include in your plan? You want a background and a scope, which typically I'm pulling from an idea template or proposal, any assumptions or constraints that you know early on. I like to provide an abridged explanation of how I'm going to gather my requirements. Now that's not really for my needs. This list is really for my PM or my sponsors. If they're not familiar with my work, it provides them a level of comfort so they're not trying to micromanage me. Then I like to note exactly what kind of deliverables I have, what I'm going to document, so there's no confusion at the end of this. Duration and timeline. So duration is how long it's going to take. It's not my effort. So if it's going to take me 6 or 8 weeks to do requirements, but I'm only working 50% of that, so, if it's 8 weeks, it's 4 weeks of work, but it's going to take me 8 weeks of actual duration or time, and then an effort, which is, my actual FTE or full-time equivalent, or the amount of time it's going to take me. Maybe I'm going to be 50% on this project, so it's going to take me 4 weeks plus or minus 25%. So I like to provide an error range so that there's a buffer. On the right there, you'll see any project can be accurately estimated once it's completed, but that's why you can provide a plus or minus 25%. So that's Ron from Parks and Recreation. It's kind of a funny show if you haven't seen it. And then I like to provide my stakeholder analysis with my RASI, and then my high level meeting schedule. And we'll talk about what a high level meeting schedule is shortly. So what I don't include in my plans, I don't include detailed meeting expectations. A lot of that has to do with that decision tree up top, where if you go too far, you're spending too much time analyzing events that may or may not happen. I don't provide detailed questions. I don't say individual meeting attendees on a per basis meeting. That's what I use this for. So it says what people are going to go to what meeting. I don't put an exact meeting time and day. And the reason for that is people's schedules change very quickly. So you'll see in a moment, I like to say which week I'm going to have a meeting, and then I go to my calendar and I figure out what works or what doesn't work. I don't put that beforehand in my plan. It's just which meetings are going to occur and in which week. Why not? See my previous slides. Really, it has to do with the return on investment of my time. The more level of detail I put in my plan, the more time it takes. It's kind of exponential. So I can get to like 90 or 95% confidence on what I'm going to deliver, you know, in an afternoon to a day's worth of work. If I want 99% confidence and this is what's going to happen, it's probably 2 weeks of work. That's not acceptable in an 8-week deliverable schedule. So how to schedule meetings. So expect iterations. And what I mean by that is expect more than one meeting. You're not going to solve problems in one meeting. Typically, I have 2 to 3 meetings per area or meeting type. And then I drill down into some of the details. Start out with broad topics and then work to the details in follow-up meetings. Book early and as far as you can reasonably predict. So for me, that's typically 2 to 3 weeks. And have shorter and smaller meetings. So typical Saskatchewan loaded labor rates are $700 to $1,000 a day. So you're conservatively, it's $100 a person per hour in a meeting. So it's very expensive. If you have a meeting with, 50 people, that's $5,000 an hour. It's important that you don't waste time. You quickly use up resource budgets. I think 1.5 hours is the upper limit of effective meeting times. Probably 45 minutes to 50 minutes is more accurate, but you can extend it a little bit longer. Pause mini is good for when you're starting to lose your voice. I like to be prepared. I like to avoid large workshops. A lot of the reasons is because they're really hard to do effectively. My exception to this is at the end, when you're doing a broad review, I bring everyone in. It's important to have everyone in a room when you do the final reviews. But typically, I like to keep the meetings under 10 people and probably under 6. If you have to do a workshops, maybe time's extraordinarily crunched, or you have resources that are coming in overseas or something like that, they're only really effective when they're very, very well organized. So you're time boxing events, you're sticking to a schedule, and you have a rotating attendee list based on that schedule. So people are coming and going. So how are you going to schedule these meetings? So what I want you to do, or what I do anyways, is I leverage my RASI chart and my prioritized list, and then I've got 2 matrices that I cross-reference. So on the right, we've got my RASI chart. So I've got my job, I've got my resource names, and then I've got the meetings that I'm going to do. And then on the left here, I've got my schedule from a high level, what meetings I want to do. And so I do my planning meeting, my kickoff meetings. Prod is my product meeting, and that will be maybe with my prime, B1, F1, L1. The one refers to iterations. So in that second week, I'm figuring out what my product is, and I'm dealing with legal issues. In my second week, I'm dealing with security, sales, my second iteration of fulfillment, and my second iteration of billing. And what I've done here is I've prioritized, know the product, and then high impact areas. And so when I go to, say, do L1, I've got my regulatory manager, And then maybe I've got my senior project manager, but I go through my HLR and I find out who's involved, go in the schedule, set that up, all the attendees, and then look for an open slot. When I move to sales, I do the same thing. I look for anyone who's got an S in this section. And so I very quickly look at the two charts, cross-reference, and put it down. And that's how you, or that's how I schedule meetings. You notice that in this week 5, I don't have too much scheduled because it's to be determined. Week 6 is a contingency week with a review and then finally a sign off. So getting things started, a good plan violently executed now is better than a perfect plan executed next week. Patton. I don't know why I seem to like World War II quotes. Probably because that's where they learned a lot about planning and it was important to execute high stakes. So the point of this is that if you've got a 7-week period, get things started early. Don't spend the first 2 weeks planning and then try to make up time later on. You're time crunched. Get that planning done early, a couple days at most, and then start executing. Much better than going through and trying to execute a more detailed plan later on. So your meeting invitation. So brevity is the soul of wit from Polonius. That's in Shakespeare, Hamlet. Be brief. People do not spend hours reading meeting invitations. So what do I include? I include a short background, why we're having this meeting. I might have supporting documentation. Might be there as an attachment. If it's sensitive documents, I'm going to provide a link to a secured authenticated site. You don't want sensitive documents as an attachment. That way, if they want to see that documentation, they can hit the link and then authenticate in. I have an agenda, and that's for both myself and the attendees. If you're on multiple projects, or even if you're not on multiple projects, but you're moving from subject area to subject area, it's nice to have a little agenda of what you want to accomplish. But we're talking, a small paragraph here, not a book. Again, you have to be brief. And then expectations. So it's important that people know what their expectations are. Specifically in follow-up meetings. On follow-up meetings, you might have expected deliverables from other people to make sure they know who they are and what they need to bring. So meetings, when you're doing a meeting, it's important that you stay on topic or target. Allow 2 minutes for side conversations. Once that 2 minutes is expired, be polite but draconian. I'm a jerk. I'm sorry. We have to stop conversation here. We'll talk about it at the end if we've got time, or I'll set up another meeting. So put a pin in that topic until the end of the meeting. Set up another follow-up meeting if necessary. But it's important not to let things go off the rails. You've got a target. You've got a topic you need to talk about. Stay on it. This always reminds me of that Star Wars coming down the Death Star. I'm not sure everyone knows that. Might be too old for most folks, but there's a guy in his X-Wing and he's stay on target, stay on target, stay on target in these meetings. It's very important. That doesn't mean side conversations aren't important. They are. You never know what's important for your meeting, but keep it down to 2 minutes and then set it up for a follow-up meeting or at the end of the meeting if you've got time. Always include next steps in those meetings. Yeah, this is kind of an odd one, but it's maybe the most important thing. So why is it important? Well, it's important because You're going to have multiple meetings, or you're likely to have multiple meetings or iterations. You've got a short period of time. If you haven't talked about what the next steps are, you come to the next meeting and you often will start from square one. So make sure you say what the next steps are and then execute them. And what I mean by that is maybe it's you're setting up a follow-up meeting on a side conversation. Maybe it is a new iteration of this meeting or something else. But the point is allow time at the end of your meeting to come up with next steps and be prepared to execute them. And finally, end the meeting when it's done. I was this always seemed odd to me, but there was a senior consultant that I was working with from another company, and he said one of the things that he learned from me was that I end meetings when they're done. A lot of people will they'll book an hour and they'll use an hour if they need it or not. If it takes me 40 minutes to get through my agenda and nothing else has come up, we don't have another topic to deal with, I end the meeting. Give people their time back. Don't use up time when you don't need it. This goes back to time is expensive. So why stay on topic? Number one reason, scope creep. When you don't stay on topic, weird things are going to come up, and often you'll add to your scope. Meetings will end without resolution, and timelines go out the window. Since I like Star Wars, I've got another Star Wars meme on here. This is from one of the first scenes in Star Wars. I have altered the scope of the project. Pray I do not alter it further. And that's likely what's going to happen when you don't stay on topic. So online and hybrid meetings. So one of the first things, and this has to do maybe more with online meetings, is getting a professional mindset. I've got for when I'm working at home, I've got my home office here. It's a short commute, but it is a commute. So when I get down there, I close the door, I'm at the office. It changes my mindset. I always dress for work. I'm not wearing sweatpants. I've had a shower, I've shaved, I've done my hair, or what my version of doing my hair. It puts you in a mental place when you get ready for work. It seems silly, but it really does. It's like flipping a switch. Now, this is not, from the space perspective, it's not always easy to do this. If you live in a small apartment, maybe you can't have a home office, but it's important to do that if you can. Profile pic. You should have a profile picture for doing Teams meetings. It shouldn't be a cartoon. It should be your face. It shouldn't be a picture of your vehicle. That way, when you're doing a Teams meeting, a WebEx meeting, or what have you, if they don't have cameras on, if there's a little picture of you, it's better than just your name. I strongly believe in cameras on. Early on in the pandemic, it was okay to have cameras off because there were bandwidth issues. If you're working from home or hybrid, cameras should be on. Non-verbal communication is excellent, or very important. You think of a hierarchy of communication. Probably the worst type of communication is text message or Twitter, right? Hard to get your point across. Emails, also not great. Then we're at telephone calls. Then we're online communication with video, and then we're in person. There's a hierarchy of, from least effective to most effective. And it drives me bananas when we live in, we have the technology today to do effective online meetings, and we handcuff ourselves by not turning them on. I'm sure everyone's got a point in time where they've done an online, they've sent a text or an email and someone's misunderstood. That doesn't happen as often with video on. and verbal and non-verbal communication. So have those cameras on. If I was running an organization, that'd be my rule. If you can't have your video on, and I know this is unpopular and I'm completely a jerk, I admit that. But if you're working from home, my rule would be video cameras on just about every meeting. I think status meetings may be the one exception. All right, I'll get off my soapbox on that one. It's a global world. There are English as second language issues that are occurring more often, and there are also cultural differences. So in some cultures, sometimes it's people are reluctant to say no. So make sure that when you're getting information or talking to people, that you have people communicate back to you in their own words. Do you understand? Yes. Okay. Tell me how you understand it. Can you repeat back to me in your own words what we need to do? English is a second language. I've had some odd communication between myself and other people, and it's over weird things. Once I used the word Roger to say that, yes, I understood. And in England, Roger means something else. And it was a bit of an embarrassing conversation. So be clear in your language. Another thing you can do in a hybrid meeting, would be one that's both in person and virtual. Get responses from people on the virtual attendee list first. It just ensures that they're engaged. Camera meeting tips. It's good to have natural backgrounds. Eliminate those distractions. I don't like having a fake background behind me. It's okay maybe with a green screen, if you've got a green screen, so that when you're moving, your head's not disappearing half the time, but it's kind of distracting. From a lighting perspective, it's good to have natural lighting. I've got a window on the opposite side. It provides natural lighting. Center your face as much as you can. It's really odd, but I've been in meetings where people are talking like this. I assume what I'm seeing now, you can see just my, above my nose and up. But those people talking like that, like I don't understand how that happens, but it does. On a weekly occasion, I see that. You should center your face-ish. Camera should be near eye level. You don't want to be looking up or looking down on the camera. If at all possible, be careful in what you're wearing. If you've got lots of stripes, you can create more patterns. That's when things looks like your shirt's moving. If that is occurring, if you zoom in a little bit, that helps. It will remove it. In this case, I haven't worn stripes, so there's no more pattern. A real and neat background. Mine's probably on the edge of too busy, but it is. But it's relatively neat, and it shows some of my interests, and sometimes that can create an interesting conversation that provides a connection between me and other people. Like I've got my telescope in the background. And so if people are in astronomy, then we start talking about that, and it's a good way to create communication. Be careful with what you do with pictures behind you. I was once in a meeting and a person had a picture of a rabbit behind them, and the way they sat, they had rabbit ears, and it can be a little bit distracting. And set expectations early for cameras. Lots of people don't have their camera on, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that because it didn't say have your cameras on. Like I said, if I ran an organization, it would be expectation is cameras on when you're working from home or in a meeting, unless it's extraordinarily large presentation with, and you're just listening in. Even then, it's good from my perspective because I can see if I'm communicating. I remember my first class that I taught online, October of 2020, in COVID, and it was extraordinarily difficult because I'm having a conversation. I'm going over the material, and it's like talking to a wall because I can't see those facial interactions. I can't see if I'm connecting. It's very important. So, but if you set the expectations early, then people aren't going to be stressed out about showing up with their cameras on. So it looks like I timed this relatively good. The summary here. So from a planning perspective, understand your organization's culture and capabilities before you start planning. Set expectations around deliverables, timelines, and estimates. Include a stakeholder analysis. And then look for those SME gaps. And then once you found those SME gaps, make sure you fill them in. Determine what meetings are required. Then prioritize and order those meetings by impacts and risks. Do not spend weeks planning. You should be planning, if you got 7 weeks, plan 1 or 2 days. I probably do everything in an afternoon. This all has to do with ROI, return on investment of your time. For meetings, brief agendas. People aren't going to spend an hour reading your agenda. Stay on target. Always have next steps, so you know what the next meeting is going to do, or if you're setting up another meeting. End meetings when they're done, and always default to cameras on, so you've got both that verbal and nonverbal communication. So the University of Regina Business Analysis Certificate Program is going to be fall and winter 2023. Those are the dates and the times. I'm teaching class 3 and 6. And then wonderfully, we're going to be back in person in the winter, spring of 2024. So that's like January, February, March. In person on the College Avenue campus. Class dates is to be determined, but I talked about the hierarchy of communication, and the best communication is in person. Next best is video online meetings. And so I think the in-person experience is the best. All right, questions?